Townspeople. That was another nightmare a few years back where students were in this very long line, and the folks who were not students were just sort of just sailing in and out in no time, and other students were missing classes, and so anyway, we've got all that drama sort of out of the way, and there's this district traditionally has been really the most volatile. Historically, the 2nd Congressional District, really going back to the early 1900s. At this point, I have an opposition that's really not putting up much resistance. We have no debates scheduled. In '06, we had 12 debates. I debated that. It was really actually pretty awful because I knew all his talking points, and we could have reversed roles at that point. We knew each other's positions so well. But anyway, that does not appear to be the case, and so we're obviously never going to take this district for granted. We've got a good team. Brian Coughlin's here, and Kat, and we're definitely going to do everything we can to make sure that no one thinks that I'm taking this district for granted. On the other hand, we are also going to do everything we can the ticket above me in terms of Chris Murphy and Ned Lamont, and obviously below me in terms of May and Greg and certainly any of the other great candidates that have really come forward in 2018, partly in response to President Trump's astonishing win in 2016. So. The governor's race, I believe, is extremely close. The stakes for UConn could not be higher in terms of the choice that's there. You can't sustain a great university by wiping out half the revenue of the state, which is basically about the only, I wouldn't even call it a platform, it's more of a talking point from Stefanowski. And I think Ned really has a very good vision for how we grow Connecticut, which is to invest in people. I'll give you one quick story. As many of you know, a big part of the 2nd Congressional District is the shipyard down in Groton. They hit the 17,000 mark in terms of the workforce down there. It was about 7,000 when I first got elected back in 2007. At the same time, it's also changing. The attrition of retirements and new hires just to replace people who are retiring has reached the point now where 60% of that 17,000 workforce are people who've been there 5 years or less. So when I was out shaking hands at 5 o'clock in the morning a week ago Friday with Ned during the shift change that was happening there, we were having trouble talking to some of the people as they were coming into the gate there, and the reason was because they were all millennials wearing earbuds at 6 o'clock in the morning, which, we went back really 10 years ago, that just, it was just nothing like that even existed. The new program manager for the USS Vermont, which is going to be christened on Saturday, is a 30-something-year-old young guy. I mean, that is a huge job in terms of being in charge of all the moving parts of putting together a vessel like the Vermont. And the next sub, right after it, the USS Oregon, the program manager is going to be a 30-something-year-old young woman, which again, it's another first. And so the workforce is changing in real time, and the fact of the matter is we need a governor who understands that there's a demographic shift that's happening, particularly in some of the key sectors where there's growth out there right now. The only question is whether or not we have a system to really close the skills gap to make sure that Connecticut is going to really take advantage of that. And Ned is going to be an education governor, a job training governor. He's going to have great allies like May and others to make sure that agenda, and it's the right agenda. It's actually a pro-business, pro-growth agenda. It's much more important than tax policy right now in terms of Connecticut is to making sure that healthcare, finance. I mean, you can go down the list, every sector. Employers are very nervous about whether or not we're going to have people there to take on the work that's going to be part of Connecticut's future. In addition to that, obviously on the ballot is going to be education policy in Washington, and I think we have a slide up here of the Aim Higher Act, which, again, elections matter in so many ways, as I said, but the handout that we have here, the Republicans last December 2017 reported out their higher education update. It's a reauthorization bill. It's 8 years late. It's usually you're supposed to do that every 5 years. Their bill turned the clock back on higher education. It made it worse, I guess is really what I would say, which is hard to imagine given the debt levels that have piled up in this country in terms of paying for college. They actually would have cut support for a whole host of higher education programs. Students who are on Stafford loans that are subsidized Stafford loans would now start paying interest while they're in school. That's never been the case going back to the 1960s when Stafford was first passed by Congress. They would have wiped out student loan forgiveness programs, which is one of the few rays of light that are out there for people who are going into education, healthcare, other critical professions. Again, the student loan forgiveness program basically says that after 10 years of commitment to those kinds of jobs and staying current with your loan payments, the balance would be forgiven or just completely written off. Again, that goes back to Eisenhower when he was president, because we had a skills gap issue back then with Sputnik when that suddenly changed everybody's view of the fact that we needed to educate our population. So the loan forgiveness program was seen as a strategy for getting people into critical areas of our workforce. Gone. That's the Republican bill. Just would have completely wiped it out. They just would have totally opened the floodgates to for-profit colleges, which are the biggest rip-off institutions that are out there right now, and waste just massive amounts of Title IV money in Stafford loans and Pell Grants. So that was their vision for higher education. On top of that, you add the Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, who has been just dismantling protections that have been built into the system for students in terms of the loan servicers who just harass people and are lose records and just are abomination in terms of how people get treated after they leave college. Again, what few protections the Obama administration put in terms of trying to fix the problem, would have been totally eliminated. And as we know, the Title IX changes that DeVos put into place in terms of the ground rules and incentives coming out of Washington in terms of dealing with sexual assault on college campuses, she also just completely rolled back all of those provisions, which were very balanced, by the way. They really were, the characterization that has been given to those rules that Obama put into place by DeVos are really just totally totally not substantiated by the facts. I mean, it's just there was a lot of thought put into how those were designed to protect students and make campuses safe places. So that's really the agenda that on the Education Committee, which I sit on, that we're really sort of looking at. If the Democrats prevail, the AIM Higher Act is really what would be our platform in terms of dealing with an update to the higher education laws. And you can sort of go through it, but again, it would boost Pell Grants. It would actually not just protect Stafford loan provisions like the in-student forbearance in terms of paying interest, but it in fact would actually allow people who are carrying high interest loan debt after college to refinance that and bring down their monthly payments. Community college, which was Obama's big initiative to make that free, would be part of the provision. And again, it would really crack down on the for-profit, just total waste of money that is out there in that end of the system. I mean, you could not have a more stark difference between one side and the other in terms of an agenda, and it's just, aside from the fact that it is much more pro-student, it's frankly, in my opinion, much more pro-growth in terms of recognizing that this country's got to up its game in terms of investing in its people, and that's what the AIM Higher Act would do. So, our campaign is definitely available if people have issues, that you're hearing about on campus in terms of, what are the Democrats really going to do? The fact is, there's a whole host of other issues. We're going to roll back the net neutrality law, rule that was put into place by Trump and his FCC chairman. We're going to codify DACA so that the 800,000 are going to be protected. We're going to be really cracking down on prescription drug costs, these are very doable. Comprehensive background checks for purchase of firearms. I mean, these are frankly things that can move very quickly. And I think once Republicans have to actually vote on this stuff, rather than having Paul Ryan blocking like he has for the last 2 years, us even getting a chance to vote on it, I actually think we would have substantial bipartisan tallies. Once push comes to shove, and they actually have to push a button, green or red, in terms of some of these provisions. Raising the minimum wage. I mean, these are things that we can move very quickly, and that's the kind of agenda that you'll see out of the House, as opposed to what's happened over the last 2 years, which has just been just total gridlock. So again, I want to thank you all for whatever work you can sort of squeeze in over the next 21 days. I know we have other visits coming back here, and I think Chris Murphy is coming in next week, maybe, sort of. That's up in the air, yeah, right. And I know certainly the Lamont campaign is going to be all over this campus. I just want to say, Mansfield made the difference in 2006 in terms of this congressional seat. There was just no question, if you do the math on an 8-3 vote win and compare the incredible difference between 2002 and 2006. I mean, as I said, it's math. And there were political science treatises on young voter turnout that actually cited the 2006 election in Connecticut too as an example where young voters actually were a decisive factor in terms of winning seats. We don't do that enough in this country. We've got to do more of it. And the registration numbers for young voters out of the Secretary of State's office is very exciting and very encouraging. But as we know, registering is one thing, voting is something else, and that's what we got to just kind of put the foot on the gas in the next 21 days. So thanks for letting me come by here and take a few questions, or go back to the party. No, it's either way. So yeah.
Hi. So I think you should deserve a lot of credit for a lot of the work you've done on the NDAA and in the omnibus with what you got on crumbling foundations, like in the Republican majority. But my question is, going forward with, hopefully we'll have a Democratic majority, like what policies that we can get through specifically on healthcare and with like that kind of issue that President Trump will actually sign and that like we can actually realistically accomplish?
I mean, it's a great question because obviously winning the majority in the House, our rules permit a voting process that's much more streamlined than the Senate. Even if we really run the table in terms of Senate races, it's hard to visualize getting to 60 votes, which was the case when President Obama in his first 2 years. And as a result, we were able to pass the Affordable Care Act. So, on healthcare, I mean, there's really some very, in my opinion, manageable items that we know will reduce premiums and stop the spike that particularly last year occurred, not just on the Obamacare exchanges, but also in the market at large. If we restore cost-sharing payments, which Trump eliminated with the stroke of a pen, there was no question that would actually stabilize these markets and drive down premium costs. And amazingly, if we have these cost-sharing payments, the cost that they share is deductibles. So a lot of people who sign up on the Obamacare exchange on bronze plans or silver plans, I mean, it's great, they have coverage, but the deductibles are very daunting. If you've got a kid who's sick or you've got chest pains, you're debating in the hospital parking lot, do I go in there or not because of the deductibles. So cost-sharing payments actually pays the deductibles for a very sizable population with in the exchange. Now you would say, well, that costs money. How are you going to get that through? It actually, the way the CBO analyzed it, it actually would reduce the deficit if we restored cost-sharing payments. So A, it will reduce premiums, and B, it will reduce deficits. Trump's decision to strike those was just a completely political, destructive act. There was no policy goal that anyone, could, with a straight face, use to justify that. So restoring those would be a very beneficial thing, and frankly, it would, when we go through the budget processes, with the new Congress, I actually think that we can find a way to do that. Okay, so that's just one very low-hanging fruit, sort of small item. but significant in terms of just, you know, the biggest complaints, particularly about the Affordable Care Act that's out there right now. And I know the chairman, the incoming chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee, Frank Pallone from New Jersey, that's definitely, you know, something that he's talked about a lot publicly. You know, in terms of, you know, other parts of the system that are out there right now, Medicare for All is obviously, you know, a rallying cry for Democrats, and it's a great rallying cry to have. There are different ideas about how, you know, you get there. You know, you've got Tim Kaine with Medicare X, which is sort of similar to what Chris Murphy's proposing. There's a Medicare buy-in that would lower the age of Medicare for the first time since 1965, and we know that actually would provide a cheaper alternative for people than what they buy on the exchange, about 40% cheaper. You know, public options, I mean, there's lots of things that we can do. Public options saves the healthcare system money. And then obviously, I mean, Medicare for All, I mean, I do think not only do you need a large majority in the Senate, you need a Democratic president to really sort of get to that sort of large outcome. But there's no question that there's steps you could sort of move towards, you know, that would open up the public options / Medicare pathway to, you know, lower costs and good access to healthcare that's out there. You know, lastly, on prescription drugs, which is the biggest complaint out there when I go to senior centers or chambers of commerce or whatever. I mean, people, it's disgusting what's happened to, you know, routine medications in terms of how they've been sort of hijacked by these hedge funds, and then they, you know, drive the price through the roof. EpiPen, you know, sort of classic example of that. My wife's a nurse practitioner, so I hear about it at home all the time. And you know, there really are some very smart ways that you can address that problem. Again, reduce the deficit simultaneously, you know, price negotiation through Medicare. You know, so there are really lots of really, I think, great ideas that have been just totally held back for completely partisan reasons. That a new majority, you know, I think it would be a really good, healthy thing for this country to get us out of this rut of repeal, you know, and you know, just or the status quo, which we've got to do better than the status quo, and there's really good ideas to how we get there.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about Medicare for All.
Yeah.
But considering 70% of the population supports it, including a majority of Republicans, and even Donald Trump on his election trail talked about Medicare for All and that he supported it, if the Democrats get control of the House, and even if they don't get control of the Senate, do you think it would be worth it to try and push it through?
There will be a bill. Let's be honest here. You know, whatever, you know, lip service Trump ever gave on the trail, I mean, not only did he back off from Medicare for All, he's trying to sabotage Medicare as it is.
I didn't intend to say that, oh, I believe Trump will
Right.
sign it, but getting them to get on the record and vote against what their own
And you know,
constituents don't like.
there very well may be those votes. Okay, but what I would say is this, is that if we were, you know, if you look at Bernie's bill, for example, okay, his bill actually does Medicare for All in stages. And it's a very thoughtful, smart way to do that. And so, I mean, his bill talks about lowering the age over a period of time. So if a bill came out that said we're going to drop it to age 50, and you know, come up with a way that finances it and pays for it, that you know, again, you can't, that people aren't going to hit you over the head saying you're just out to raise taxes. If that happened, again, Medicare has not changed its age of eligibility since 1965. If this Congress could pass a bill that dropped the age of eligibility to 50, and somehow found a pathway to get that sort of enacted, that would be history in the making. It really would. And the benefit in terms of establishing a precedent that you could then take to a next lower group, you've created that by doing that. And that's not sacrificing the concept of Medicare for All by any stretch. And so, I mean, I just think, you know, people should just stay, we all get it, you know, in terms of what the goal is here, but there really is an honest debate of people with goodwill who care about this issue, about what's the right pathway to get there. And again, you can just look at it for a roadmap in Senator Sanders' bill. Yeah.
Why have you not signed HR 4391, which is the Palestinian Children Detention Act, to make sure our taxpayer dollars don't go to help IDEA,
So,
put kids in jail.
yeah, I mean, the language, frankly, is, in my opinion, got some issue. We've been over this with the advocates, you know, very much. And I, you know, personally, I feel that you could make an argument that the language is not good enough because it will still maintain a separate system of criminal prosecution for Palestinian youth in occupied territories. In my opinion, there should not be any military jurisdiction over kids who are arrested, you know, in those territories. That bill would actually retain that separate dual track method of handling these kids' cases that are there. So, you know, again, the bill got drafted with really no opportunity for people to actually talk through some of these issues. And I just feel that issue has got it deserves, frankly, a re-scrub in terms of how the language is going to be put together. I've signed, you know, letters in support of maintaining the Palestinian Authority, which, as you know, Trump wants to obliterate. You know, putting the embassy in Jerusalem, you know, that was a terrible move by the Trump administration. So, I mean, you know, when we get a majority, and we actually have folks on the International Relations Committee that care about trying to create some balance in the Palestinian territories, I think you're going to actually have an opportunity to really sort of work through language that is, I think, reasonable.
Would you be willing to withhold or divert funds to Israel if it meant they would correct some human rights abuses?
So I think, you know, it depends on who's making the evaluation, and that's really the question that, you know, who makes that decision in terms of whether or not there's abuses or not. I mean, is it going to be Trump's State Department? Because really, that's really what the bill was relying on, was really, you know, our State Department being the referee.
Do you think there are abuses?
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I've been there, okay? So, I mean, I've seen, you know, the problem there in terms of the proximity and frankly the difficulty that people in Ramallah, which I visited, are experiencing over there. You want somebody else? Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
There was a recent report, I think, by the UN, the climate report.
Yeah.
Like, how does a Democratic-controlled Congress plan to really like expand environmental protections and actually like put regulations on like corporations on their emissions? Because like a large part of emissions come from corporations, and the Trump administration, of course, is pushing for clean coal, which obviously like isn't, I guess, good for the environment in comparison to all these renewables that might be more expensive now, but in the long run will save probably millions and possibly billions in potential like flood damages and just like other climate mitigating factors.
So, you know, first of all, you know, there have been actions taken by the administration which Congress can respond to. For example, undercutting the fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks, which was, you know, stunning in terms of, you know, not only its anti-climate end game, but also how dumb it is in terms of our economy. Because, you know, really we're just sort of handcuffing our auto industry in terms of being able to compete, you know, by having dirtier, less efficient cars that cost drivers more money. I mean, it was just, you know, hard to understand, you know, and the grounds they gave that it was a safety issue for passengers was really, you know, it's like a Saturday Night Live skit. So anyway, you know, the fuel efficiency standards emanated from acts of Congress, and that's certainly something that we can, you know, we never codified. We sort of, because it was a bipartisan thing over the years in terms of raising the fuel efficiency standards, but obviously we're going to have to get much more serious about just, you know, by statute limiting what they could do. The you know, the Clean Power Plant rule, which was also torpedoed by the administration, was another just, you know, really terrible step backwards. Yeah, there were parts of the country that didn't like it because they, you know, were much more you know, reliant on coal burning plants. But the fact of the matter is that Gina McCarthy, as the EPA administrator, have done great work in terms of getting acceptance of that and really getting some traction to move that forward. So again, that's another effort that codification, by statute, certainly would be a good path to follow. Overall, the question of, how do we put a price on emissions is really up for it's up for reconsideration. We passed the cap and trade back in 2009. The House died in the Senate, and that was sort of the high water mark in terms of trying to put a cost on carbon emissions. Carbon tax, over time, I think the argument in favor of that has really gotten much more powerful, and I do think you're going to see a carbon tax proposal coming out of the House. And the support in the Ways and Means Committee is very strong for pushing that. And I mean, that's when you're really starting to get serious about trying to change what you described.
There was another report released that the U.S. Army, well, the military, is the #1 polluter in the entire world. And I wondered if you heard of any chatter about looking into the environmental emissions of the military and regulating that.
I mean, I'd love to see that report, because actually, if you look at, if you go down to Groton right now, they're the biggest geothermal solar panel user in Connecticut. I mean, there's just no question that base has, made amazing strides in terms of reducing carbon emissions, and to the extent that they're ahead of the curve in terms of most sort of parts of the state. The former Secretary of the Navy, Ray Mabus, under Obama, again, he, in the Great White Fleet under Theodore Roosevelt, well, he did the Great Green Fleet, which is that they actually, were converting Navy, engine-powered ships to biofuel, and obviously the nuclear-powered is carbon-free. So, I really would like to see that. I mean, the Air Force uses up a tremendous amount of fossil fuels, no question about it, and the Army, ground forces do as well. I remember those hearings at the Armed Services Committee when Mavis would come over, and the oil patch members of Congress from Texas would just lambaste him about what the initiatives that he was starting over at the Navy, and he actually relished getting into loggerheads with members of Congress, so they were pretty lively events. But there are examples where I think the military actually has been ahead of the curve in terms of implementing renewables out there. But be happy to take a look at that. I don't, William. Good to see you.
How are you?
Good.
Where's the best Chinese food in Eastern Connecticut?
I think Vernon has some pretty good Thai food.
Golden Palace in Montville would be my
Golden Palace, right, in Montville.
That'd be my guess if anyone's asked. Yeah.
Yes.
What are some of your plans to keep millennials in Connecticut? Well, I guess Jen, in Connecticut after you graduate.
So, I think, at the end of the day, we've got to just, find high-value jobs that make it work financially to sort of stay here. And what I talked about earlier in terms of what I see out there in terms of growth, the fact of the matter is that they're contrary to what Stefanowski is saying, there really is stuff happening in the state where there's going to be opportunities for that. But what we got to do is we got to get our education system aligned with the workforce needs in those sectors. Again, I've been very close, obviously, to what's happening, down in Groton, which, as I said, that workforce is changing overnight, and we're seeing folks coming in from out of state to move here to Connecticut, and it's showing up in the real estate market. The third quarter results for Wyndham and New London County showed really healthy growth in terms of sales and median price, which means there's a demand that's starting to really pick up speed. And you talk to realtors, they will tell you it's a younger cohort of home buyers that are out there right now. Not everybody wants to be a welder or a designer, in a shipyard or engine producer, but you know, there's, I think, a ripple effect when you have growth in those high value areas as well. And I personally am somebody who feels very strongly that the arts is a really solid way to grow economies. You know, when you look at communities, particularly in Eastern Connecticut, like Norwich, New London, Willimantic, you know, the way we sort of get those cities really vibrant is really by promoting a very strong, healthy arts community. And in fact, it's happening, right? I mean, no, we're really seeing it. And so, because really, you look at other cities which are attracting millennials, you know, that's really a key part of it. And it's good, it's, you know, I understand that. I mean, you know, I have a 28-year-old and a 24-year-old at home. So, you know, I know what makes, you know, what they're looking for. And they want places to live which are interesting, and, you know, people like them live there. And that's what, again, Lamont really, I truly believe, gets that. And by the way, Connecticut is leaving money on the table in terms of arts grant funding from NEA, you know, National Endowment for the Arts, Humanities Council. It's a real issue for the next governor, is that how do we come up with better ways that Connecticut competes for federal dollars, because there's not going to be a lot of extra state dollars in terms of investing in those places, but frankly, there are opportunities that we're leaving on the table.
So I'm a senior, and a lot of my friends are seniors, so we're obviously all graduating this year.
Yeah.
And I know that there's a general consensus among all of us that we're pretty scared about the future because we're graduating with a bachelor's degree, and many people have tons of debt just from their bachelor's degree, whereas the way things are now, you can't really get a job that can support first paying rent in a state like Connecticut or anywhere else where it's worth to pay rent, like New York or where the jobs are. And second, with degree inflation, it's really hard to get jobs that will both pay rent and pay off student loans without having a higher degree or going to another level of schooling. So I understand that the AIM Hire Act and all these are invested in helping the students of the future, but what about your education policy is geared toward the students of the present?
So, two things. Number one, you know, the income-based repayment program, which was created actually in 2008 under Obama, you know, set up a system where people, particularly new graduates who were sort of just, you know, starting out in the job market and who are not at their peak earnings, to say the least, that they can apply for basically a reduction in their monthly payments based on their income. It's a means-tested program, and actually Senator Ted Kennedy is the sort of original proponent of that. So IBR, as it's called, is a program that sometimes it's not as well publicized, but that's actually an opportunity no matter where you live, whether it's Connecticut or any other place, which can actually take some of that pressure off the cost of paying loans back. And certainly our office has tons of information in terms of trying to get that out there to people. The second is legacy debt. Okay, there's a lot of you know, graduates who are still carrying high loans, and they when they took down the loans, their interest rates were sort of above what is the sort of consumer debt levels for other types of credit, which is much lower than student loan debt. And so Elizabeth Warren and I have a joint bill, the Bank on Students Student Loan Refinancing Act, which would allow people to write down their interest rates for you know, high interest legacy student loans. You know, the last is the loan forgiveness program, which I mentioned earlier. We can just discharge the debt entirely. But again, that's sort of, you have to sort of do your homework on that in terms of, you know, what you know, where you headed in terms of, you know, careers, because there are specific categories that, again, education, healthcare, as I mentioned earlier, you know, that are identified as eligible for just getting rid of the debt entirely. We're actually, I have a bill called the Young Farmers Success Act, which is actually talking about putting agriculture in as a public service loan forgiveness program, because we have this aging demographic in food production that's very scary in terms of the average age of farmers are in this country. So we're trying to come up with ways to promote agriculture, you know, as a way of you know, being viable. financially for people. So again, I mean, some of that is touched on in the AIM Hire Act, but there actually are already some built-in programs today that really do provide some assistance in terms of lowering the cost of student loan debt in particular. So it's IBR, income-based repayment.
To sort of add on to what Lucy said, is there, in short, your last sentence is invest in teachers and strengthens training for teachers, etc. Is there anything in this AIM Hire Act that looks at the high school career guidance and such? Because, as mentioned, degree inflation, I think that there's a lot of careers that really don't benefit from a college education, and again, it increases the entry level for people and requires an upfront investment.
I mean, that's a great question, because, you know, it's time that we start looking at the higher ed issue at the beginning of the process, not just at the end of the process. And so the answer is yes. I mean, this is really just a summary, but that is clearly, we need to really make the whole system much more transparent in terms of the quality of degrees and the true costs, as opposed to the hype, you know, that a lot of institutions put out there. And obviously the whole, that role of a guidance system at the high school level, frankly, it can't be just hitting someone the catalog and get back to me, you and your family make your top 5 choices. I mean, it really requires a much more strategic approach in terms of, how it's like buying a house now when you go to college, and you don't want to have that mortgage hang over you for the rest of your life. And that decision point when you go into the process can really create ramifications that are lifelong. So the answer is absolutely yes. And that's really, I think, in many respects, in some ways, almost the most important reform you can make. Yeah?
Hi. Are there any current plans on restoring DACA, since it's been a year since it was eliminated and there hasn't really been anything done for that?
So I mentioned earlier, if the Democrats take control of the House, that's one of the bills that's going to be first out of the chute. The Aguilar-Hurd bill, which was a bipartisan bill, Pete Aguilar, Democrat from California, Will Hurd, Republican from Texas. We actually had over 218 co-sponsors on that, which is the magic number, but Paul Ryan, again, blocked consideration of that bill. We were supposed to have the Queen of the Hill process where the measure for DACA that got the most votes would actually prevail, and he completely backed away from that pledge to allow us that opportunity. So I mean, frankly, if they call this into session tonight and I got on a plane and went down there, it would pass. I mean, there's just no question that the votes are there to do that bill. Sadly, I don't see it happening in the lame duck, which actually would be a perfect opportunity for him because he's leaving, and he has less pressure on him somewhat to actually do that. We actually passed the Dreamers bill in a lame duck in 2010, right before the House flipped from Democrat to Republican, and we came up 3 votes short in the Senate to get it to Obama. Luis Gutierrez was crying on the floor of the House the night that we passed it, and unfortunately, that was sort of the high water mark. But believe me, that is an issue which is going to move very quickly with a new Congress. Yeah.
Are there any current plans for Connecticut to combat the disparity in the prison population and who gets sent to prison and who gets arrested via the war on drugs, or in short, legalizing marijuana?
So I'm going to let William probably handle that because he's been in the legislature and has really worked on this in the judiciary committee.
And May's on the Judiciary Committee, and Connecticut's been a leader in criminal justice reform. Hi, I'm William Tong.
Please feel free to.
I just wanted to be here with Joe tonight.
Thank you for coming.
Congressman, nice to see you. Sorry.
You're the perfect man.
So I'm William Tong. I'm the Democratic and Working Families Party nominee for Attorney General, and I'm a state representative, and I'm House Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. You were on the Judiciary.
I was.
Oh, you weren't? Okay. Well, May is, and Connecticut's been a national leader on criminal justice reform. There are 3 significant pieces of legislation that we've passed to try to dismantle a system of mass incarceration here in Connecticut and lead the nation. One is the Second Chance Society law, which focuses on removing draconian mandatory minimum sentences for simple drug possession. The bail reform law, which tries to eradicate a system that penalizes poverty, and the excessive use of force law, which you can guess from the title of that bill is about accountability and law enforcement and treating people fairly and avoiding excessive use of force by law enforcement that can result in serious injury and death. Those are the three main pillars of the Second Chance Society here in Connecticut. There's also a ton being done on juvenile justice reform here in Connecticut, being led by Tony Walker in the House, and because of that, we have the lowest prison population in a generation. It dropped from over 20,000 under Governor Rell to 14,500 today, and we are at historic lows for crime. We have the second highest drop in violent crime of any state in the nation.
And closed facilities.
And we've closed facilities, and frankly, Connecticut is one of the safest states in the nation because of it. So.
Not bad. No, I mean,
Not
really,
bad.
you know, when you rank the 50 states, what you guys have been doing is pretty impressive.
Yeah, and this, you know, not to put too fine a point on it, this is a legacy of the last 8 years that is not well understood and not well celebrated. You know, there's a lot of criticism of this governor, and the fact is we've done a lot on this issue, and frankly more than any other state in the nation.
So in Washington, I mean, criminal justice reform actually had some interesting allies for a short time there. Trey Gowdy, who some of you may have seen on TV, you know, he was the chairman of the oversight committee. He was a former U.S. attorney from South Carolina, and actually is very passionate about sentencing disparity and particularly racial impact. And he and Obama actually were meeting pretty actively for a good year or two, and really trying to hammer out a proposal that would have attracted some Republican votes along with our side. Unfortunately, the clock ran out, and McConnell now, and particularly Jeff Sessions, you know, the U.S. attorney. I mean, it's just a totally, you know, completely different environment, and Trump actually has no interest in you know, moving on this. So we sort of had a moment there where it looked like it was close, and it just sort of, you know, the political decision of 2016 just sort of pulled that whole opportunity apart. But I personally believe it's going to come back. I used to be a public defender, so I'm pretty close to what the system was like back in, you know, when the mandatory system was coming into effect. And you know, that's just been a total bust in terms of you know, how to run a criminal justice system, and the feds are going to hit that same you know, sort of tipping point, and it's going to come.
It's saved our state hundreds of millions of dollars, and I think all three of us can say it's extraordinarily frustrating because Republican governors actually have been leading on this issue in other states, and on things like criminal justice reform, like immigration, like sexual assault, sexual harassment. We have a lot of Republicans who want to vote for these measures, and they are supportive, but they can't get out of their own way in a Trump era to get there, and it's extraordinarily frustrating because we know that there's a lot of bipartisan support, but it just, because it's such a polarized place, you know, I find it hard to believe that someone like Paul Ryan, you know, couldn't sit down and have a conversation about it, but he's so stuck in that mode that he won't allow consideration of something that has 218 votes.
Gowdy's leading, by the way.
Can I just add one thing that's a little bit strange about criminal justice reform in Connecticut? You know, the initiatives that William was just talking about, unfortunately, in Connecticut, with Connecticut Republicans, they've been very controversial. You know, Joe mentioned when he first started talking about, you know, his congressional district being competitive and this state senate district being very competitive. And when we won 2 years ago by 520 votes, this campus was a huge part of that. And needs to be again this year to make sure we have a good victory this time. But you know, the last 2 cycles, one of the main things my opponent has used against me is that I voted for these criminal justice reforms. Republicans in Connecticut are light years behind the rest of us when it comes to these issues. They run the same narratives. You think you're like in 1993 before you were all born. The way that these advertisements they use to attack those of us that have been supportive of moving forward and recognizing the reality of the situation. In Connecticut, Republicans are completely backwards on this, and it's another reason why we can't continue to have a state senate that's half controlled by Republicans or a state house that's controlled by Republicans, because all of these reforms will go backwards, and it's especially important that we have a Democratic governor that's gonna continue to believe in this and lead on these issues, because if we don't, we're really gonna go backwards and start falling behind instead of leading the country.
Do you guys have any proposals on how to increase the help available to those who need like mental facilities? Because I know in like the state of Connecticut, my mom used to work at Connecticut Valley Hospital, but they have like a very limited number of beds, and there are so many people in the state who need that access to the treatment, but they don't have it.
Well, I mean, in terms of, real, sort of promising developments, I mean, in terms of behavioral health, I mean, obviously heroin opioid, there actually has been pretty impressive bipartisan support for boosting block grants to states, which I just met with Commissioner Delphin Rittman a couple days ago, the Connecticut Mental Health Commissioner, who was sort of walking through the pretty healthy increase in funds that's coming into Connecticut. Again, it's very focused on addiction issues that are there, which is obviously an epidemic and a plague almost that's happening out there. But there is honest to God real surge in terms of some of the programs to promote workforce development for people dealing with that issue. In terms of but most folks who really understand this realize many times addiction is not just a one diagnosis issue, that there are other sort of mental health conditions that are inextricable from it, and you really do have to expand the way you treat people who are addiction cases to include issues from depression to you name it, and I do think that's going to be a focus of the commissioner in terms of how these resources get handled. But again, the numbers are actually quite significant. What's starting to flow in to all the states, but certainly including Connecticut. Yeah.
I saw a report recently that there is a growing number of congressmen who are refusing corporate PAC money. Would you be willing to take that oath as well, to swear off corporate PAC money and pursue a constitutional amendment to ban money in politics?
Well, the constitutional amendment is easy. The answer is yes to that, okay? Because, and in fact, there is a number of bills. John Sarbanes, who's sort of the campaign finance reform leader in the House, has a proposal about, again, dealing with the constitutional issue about private money in the system. As far as my own self personally, I mean, I feel that, there are sectors in this district, like the shipyard down there where, 17,000 jobs are, part of the landscape that's there, which I think is a good thing in terms of, what the health of the constituency that I represent. And I really do not have any kind of, ironclad issue today, given the way the the campaign financing works in this country, about accepting contributions from General Dynamics or United Technologies. That's where my people work that I represent. So it is fully disclosed. I mean, you can look up the FEC report and you can see every penny that our campaign has used. I get it that there are folks out there that are campaigning that have made that their standard in terms of how they conduct campaigns. This district is not sort of a place that, frankly, I think individual contributions can really, sort of for a Democrat who's running here, who's not a self-funder, really kind of keep up in terms of what a campaign involves out here. When I won by 83 votes, my opponent, took tobacco money and oil company money, spent about $5 million. Okay, and we spent about half that. And some of it was, PAC money, particularly from labor and other advocacy groups who also form their own PACs. So, we needed, frankly, those resources to be in a position to actually reverse a seat. And since then, holding on to that seat has also required, extraordinary effort and resources. This is not, a slam dunk district by any stretch. Even though this year's campaign may look, fairly uncontested, that's not the DNA of the second congressional district.
What about this year then, where you basically don't even have a Republican
Well,
general?
I mean, we understood that about 2 or 3 weeks ago, okay? I mean, really, that was not really the expectation, given the fact that this was Trump's best congressional district in the state of Connecticut. And part of the reason, frankly, that we were able to be in a position to discourage opposition was because, frankly, we had worked hard to have a very strong campaign report that shows whoever wanted to run against me that frankly they were going to have a very daunting challenge, and I think that's been good so that we can actually put resources into other campaigns. So I am contributing to a lot of members in other districts. I was just talking to Daniel O'Connor from Ohio, which is one of those 1-point races that are out there, about sending him some money, which I'm going to be doing, and just really literally about 3 hours ago, and also certainly helping with the DCCC, so that some of these races out there that really are still knife edge. Amy McGrath, Kentucky 6, it's a 1-point race. She's a great candidate, and that's a district we can win because it used to be a Democratic district up until 2012. So I'm sending Amy money. I mean, I can go through the whole list. There's about 40 Democrats that are running out there that I'm sharing, this unexpected windfall that we have because of just the way this race is sort of shaken out. But no one expected that going back a year and a half ago. The National Republican Campaign Committee put this district on their hit list right after the election because it was a 2-point race for Trump. I mean, that's the way that it's like a horse racing form in terms of how they calculate what districts to target.
Considering how much money candidates in both House and Senate races have managed to succeed across the country, I just disagree with your opinion that a candidate can't pay corporate.
I didn't say it can't. I just said that in this district, I think if you really sort of sat down and tried to figure out how you would come up with a budget to run a credible campaign that's a contested one, it would be very challenging.
Can I add something from the flip side, if that's
Yeah.
okay? So one of the other roles that I have in the state Senate is I'm chair of the Government Administration and Elections Committee. And as we've talked about before, in Connecticut, for state offices, we have a system of public financing where, the entire time I've run for the legislature, I have to get X amount of dollars from X amount of people who live in our district, and then I get a grant from the state of Connecticut to run my campaign with. I get that grant and I agree to that program knowing that my opponent will have the exact amount of money that I have. Now, when we first started this program 10 years ago, that was before the Citizens United Supreme Court decision. And so you could know that you and your opponent had the same amount of money, and it was about who had the better message and who spent their money in the smartest way. And what's happened since Citizens United is that system is completely under attack. So I don't know if you can, what you're describing in your proposition, I don't think you can do until you've got a Congress that will overturn Citizens United, and until you've got a system of public financing, which is something Democrats, if they were in charge of the House of Representatives, would move forward with. I can tell you that right now, Betsy DeVos's family actually is investing almost $1 million just to try to make the state Senate here in Connecticut Republican. I mean, that's the kind of attack that our clean system for elections is up against. And I can't lie to you that there are times that some of my colleagues want to move away from the system. Democrat, and especially the Republicans. The Republicans are always trying to get rid of the clean election system. And when you agree to these spending limits, it's pretty scary that these outside PACs can come in and, in this district, our Senate district was targeted by tens of thousands of dollars 2 years ago to try to help my Republican opponent beat me so that the state Senate would turn Republican. This outside money is some really, really scary stuff, and it's all dark, and there's a lot of digging that has to happen to figure out where the money is coming from, and it comes in at the absolute last minute. So we've got to have a Congress that's willing to overturn Citizens United to really clean up our election system.
The other half of that then would be, as a state representative, would you be willing to call for an Article 5 amendment to the Constitution? Would you be willing to have the state of Connecticut call for a group of states to come together and pass their own amendment without touching Congress?
Pass their own amendment.
So
for
you're talking about a
citizens.
constitutional convention around
Yes.
Citizens United. So
here's the problem.
we can have that conversation, but I'm not convinced as chairman of your Judiciary Committee and this is a congressional issue too, it's a bit above our pay grade, but I'm not convinced you can have a constitutional convention that isn't open to a whole bunch of other issues like, you know, eliminating a woman's right to choose, for example, or reversing so many of the gains that we've made in civil rights, you know, in the last 50 to 100 years here in this country. So that's the problem with the Constitutional Convention, is opening it up. I know there's an argument, there's an academic argument, sorry, there's an academic argument. Yes, it's an academic argument. It's an academic argument that it could happen and that we could open it and limit it just as Citizens United. Until that's tested in court and in open warfare, you don't know. And I don't know that we want to take the risk for one issue to open up the Constitution and lose a woman's right to choose, which is already imperiled now by Brett Kavanaugh anyway.
Two things. One, we already have enough states calling for 2 different amendments, enough to get a constitutional convention that has not been called yet. So we already know that that is not true, that you can just run away with it. And even if it did, you need 8 states to block an amendment. 8 states, and there's no way you're going to get 8 states to block to.
Let me put it this way. You want to roll the dice in the Trump era where the rule of law, the respect for the rule of law is at an all-time low in our nation's history? I'm just saying, this is a difficult proposition.
We also have, not to interject, but there's so many states controlled by Republican legislatures that it would be detrimental.
Not
And
43.
Americans for Prosperity, which is the Koch brothers super PAC, that it's putting a lot of money into Bob Stefanowski, and it's putting a lot of money into the opponents of like Andy Barr, who's running against Amy McGrath, and I forgot his name, but the Republican who just won the special election against Danny O'Connor. And Troy Balderson. And the Koch brothers, their main goal is to call for an Article 5 convention so they can open up the Constitution, and they want to put through all these amendments that now with Brett Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, if they brought a lawsuit against that constitutional convention, they would be able to do right away.
Yeah.
So I think one of the scariest things and one of the biggest issues we're facing right now is the intense partisanship that surrounds the 2 parties. And it's really upsetting to know that there's no such thing as a moderate Republican anymore, or that even if someone is, let's say, conservative via like government or taxes, there's just no way to think one thing and not think everything else that goes along with that party. And I think that's super detrimental to our country, because then we have candidates who only look a certain way. And then when someone's voting, they can only choose between 2 certain things. And I was wondering if there's any plan, if the Democrats do take back the Congress or the House, to maybe, what are your ideas on trying to stop something like that?
So, I mean, that's a question that I get asked really like universally out there. And, you know, what I would say is process matters. Okay, when you, you know, have a system in place, which has unfortunately been the case for the last 2 years, where the Rules Committee has been, which is really the gatekeeper for floor debate in the House, in terms of whether or not amendments can be offered, you know, whether the Aguilar-Hurd bill can be brought to the floor. When you have a Rules Committee that passes more closed rules than any time in American history, which basically shuts down any amendments being offered by the other side, then what you have is basically a process that drives people apart. So if you know, we take back majority, you know, the question is, well, is it gonna be just payback time? You know, now it's our turn kind of thing. So the incoming Rules Committee leader on our committee, Jim McGovern from Massachusetts, has actually already started a planning process about trying to really change that approach, to understand that, you know, when you have a system where people don't even get a chance to sort of offer an amendment, then what you're doing is you're just creating you know, a polarized system that where people feel they have no stake in terms of participating in any way that would promote compromise. And so I give Jim a lot of credit that he's actually trying to really change just the system that's there. He's going to be he's going to be new as the chairman, because his predecessor actually sadly passed away on the Democratic side about 4 or 5 months ago, but frankly, whatever, how it happened, he really wants to approach this job much differently in terms of trying to, make it breathe more. And I'll tell you, when I served on the House Armed Services Committee, we have, that's the one bill that kind of is like Schoolhouse Rock, where you start in the committee and you go to the floor and, and then it goes to conference and then, it gets passed and it gets signed, the bill goes off to the president. So John McCain, he was dying of cancer when he was presiding over the conference committee for the House Armed Services bill. And it actually ended up passing with the largest bipartisan majority since 2008. And he talked really very emotionally. I mean, he got choked up about the fact that, he was determined to make sure that this committee gave both sides a chance to offer amendments, to have their chance, their opportunity to participate. And when you do that, you create buy-in. And that's why at the end of the day, we had such a really quite striking result in terms of, going against the conventional wisdom about how Washington is hopelessly gridlocked. And, frankly, it was pretty special being in a room with him, a guy like him, to hear him really talk about that, we've got to get back to regular order. It's not an issue that's gonna get people jumping out of their chairs, cheering, but the fact of the matter is, it really, really matters. And Ryan has just been, as a speaker, it's just been, you just go down the line in terms of how he has actively, blocked any consideration of, gun violence, net neutrality, any kind of healthcare alternatives, while that debate was going on there. And as a result, I mean, I think his legacy is just gonna be, passing a tax bill that's bankrupting the country and, skewed towards the top 1%, and that's about it in terms of his time as speaker. It's not much. I prefer McCain's legacy.
I'll follow that up with, do you think it's more beneficial to, if, let's say, we do take back the House, to, again, it's our turn now
Right.
to, kind of be the ones who do what we want to do and ignore everything and block everything? Or do you think it's more beneficial to say, okay, let's try to get back to normal, but it's hard to mediate between the two because there's so many things that have to get done, but it's also.
Yeah, I don't wanna sit here like, kumbaya,
Yeah,
thing
exactly.
here. But I mean, the fact is there's limits to how far, you can sort of, you don't wanna debate forever, in terms of stuff. But the fact is that this system is really incredibly choked off right now, and it's, and I frankly think for us, we have to show the country, that we're prepared to do things differently. At the end of the day, the two parties really disagree on some of these issues. But, when the Democrats took the House back in '06, and it was my first time there as a freshman, in the first month, we raised the minimum wage, which had not been touched in years, and we got Republican votes. And in fact, the numbers were so significant that Bush signed it into law. We cut student loan interest rates with the College Cost Reduction Act, which again got enough Republican votes that even Bush couldn't resist it. We almost got there on prescription drug price negotiation. It fell a little bit short, but the fact of the matter is that, when we get a chance to vote on some of these things that have been bottled up, we're gonna get Republican votes. We really will. DACA, will get Republican votes. There are members from California and the Southwest who represent high Latino districts. They have to vote for a DACA fix, or they're committing suicide. So I actually don't feel it's quite as, people shouldn't sort of get totally, resigned to the fact that it's just, now that the football's on the other end of the field, it's just gonna be the same, nothing.
Can I add to that? But it really, at the end of the day, it comes down to people. Process is important, but that's why the second congressional district is so important, and why I know that your opponent just stepped aside, but why returning Joe Courtney to Congress is so important. Because in our legislature, it's the people that are respected, uniformly by both sides of the aisle that get things done. And Joe Courtney is textbook for having appeal on both sides of the aisle, and that's why this will be led by people like our Congressman here.
I think I'm a pretty liberal-minded person, so I've agreed with a lot of things that you've said, and I understand the need for, all these gains and all these wins and all these different districts. But I'm a little uncomfortable with the idea of our political process being kind of like a chess match. Has there been any signs of reforms to make this political system more representative of people? Like, let's say like runoff elections, things to combat like gerrymandering in many of the states.
So, I mentioned earlier to the young guy over there about how John Sarbanes from Maryland is really, in my opinion, one of the most thoughtful members of Congress in terms of issues of political reform. And he's got a piece of legislation, the We the People Act, which again talks about campaign finance reform, but it also talks about gerrymandering issues as well. Frankly, we need to do a voting rights extension, which again the Supreme Court shot down outrageously about 4 or 5 years ago, so that some of the voter intimidation stuff that's going on out there is going to be stopped. That's out there right now. So political reform is definitely an agenda that I think you're going to see our side sort of push. And it really, there's no like automatic gain for Democrats by doing that. But what you described is something that is very, I think, very widespread in the public out there right now. That they just sort of feel. I mean, Trump's famous line that it's all rigged. I mean, that actually really resonated with people. And so that's why that reform agenda that Sarbanes has is. I think going to be a really positive, response, and we can certainly give you some of the information on that.
You just asked us to pull out because apparently we had the room till 8:30, so.
Yeah.
They want to close down stuff.
Thank you so much.
All right, good. Yeah, no, that was
May I
good.
Your birthday's April 22nd.
Are you-